What is computer science to me, personally? It's a difficult question, but it's not a difficult question because it's complicated or hard or because it's irrelevant. Certainly not that, quite the opposite. It's a difficult question because it touches on so many aspects of the world, so many elements of society, of business and academia and languages and politics. And so it's a difficult question because it's so broad, it touches so many things. If I had to break it down, which again is tricky, I'd probably pick three main elements to highlight: information, computation, and automation. Information is your starting point to a problem. It's your input. It's any data about the world. And we know, of course, that data science is everywhere now, and you probably hear that term a lot. But that input could be a whole range of things. Consider, for instance, the movie you're watching, the image behind me. It could be the pixels in the image. Some of them are white up here, the roof and the wall, and some of them are brown down here towards the bookcase, and that could be your input. From a networking perspective, it could be cell phone data. Who calls me from a given location, or who calls who from a given location at a given time of the day? It could even, of course, be the human voice down the phone. That could be your information. If you're interested in weather and climate, it could be a temperature. If you're interested in languages, it could be the words written on a screen in French or English. And it's any input to a problem. That's information. It doesn't even really have to be real world. I think of it as always being real world because I'm a data scientist and that's what I deal with. But if you're interested in pure math, it could be a number. It could be 63. It could be the cosine of 27 degrees. It's any starting point to a problem. It's any piece of information you're going to put into a problem. Then moving on to computation. Computation is what you do with that information. I often think of it as an if-then process, a decision-making process. This is sometimes called logic in computer science. For example, again, think of the image behind me. If I said to you, okay, I want you to make all of the white pixels appear green, but the brown pixels, leave them alone. Then you'd need a decision-making process. If it's white, make it green. If it's brown, don't do anything to it. If, then. If you like, it's the rules of the game. Consider in my cell phone example, maybe a particular business gets calls from Florida and it gets calls from Wyoming. And when it gets calls from Wyoming, it wants to sell those people beach vacations. And when it gets calls from Florida, it wants to sell those people skiing vacations. So if the call comes from Florida, do one thing. If the call comes from Wyoming, do another thing. I suppose the classic decision-making process you can think about is a robot. It could be a little boxy thing on wheels. It could be a human-looking figure, and it's walking along, and it sees a wall. It perceives the wall. And what it does with that information, it could turn around, it could go left, it could go right, it could walk into the wall. Maybe if the wall, it sees there's more of a gap to the right, it's going to go right. Maybe if it thinks it's flimsy, it's going to just keep going. Maybe if it's a big long wall, it'll turn around. But those are if-then decisions. If the wall is like this, if I see it to be like this, my information, then do this, my computation. Finally, there's automation. One thing that computing is very good at is things in the computing realm is doing the same thing over and over and over again, many times. So for example, the problem I gave you with pixels, you might think, well, turn all the white pixels in this image, my information. If it's white, turn it green, a little bit of computation. Doesn't seem particularly difficult. Maybe a human could just color them in. But what if I asked you to do that for every movie that had ever been made? Much trickier. A computer would be much better at doing that because of automation. It could do the same information and computation process over and over again. In my cell phone example, what if instead of one person fielding calls from Wyoming or Florida, you had every call ever made between 2007 and 2016, and you wanted to know on a Monday if people were more interested in, you see what I'm getting at. A computer, again, the automation process could do this over and over and over again. My robot walking towards a wall, its first decision is left or right, but then there's another wall, there's a hole, there's a ramp. It's going to have to take information, computation, do many, 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 many things with it. Automation. I said at the beginning that all of this touches on the human condition, and that might have seemed a stretch, but think of what you do in your daily life. You perceive stuff, it's information. You make a decision, it's computation. And maybe through your life you've done things many, 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 many times. Be automation. So for example, say you come home and you're going to make dinner, and you look in the fridge, and you have beef and chicken and pork, and then you have a bunch of vegetables. And you might think, well, okay, I feel like the chicken, but if I'm going to have the chicken, I better have it with broccoli. If I'm going to have the beef, maybe I'll have it with potatoes. If then, decision making, so you've made a computation from your information, from what you perceived in the fridge. And if you do that every night of your life, and every human being is doing that every night of their lives, then that's a big problem. That's a problem you're going to need automation to resolve. So again, just my opinion, because there's so much scope to computer science, it touches on all things. But for me, fundamentally, it's information, how you store it, what you do with it, how you record it. Computation, what logic you apply to that information. And then automation, being able to do things many, many, many times over.